Hello, everyone. My name is Chelsea Wilson, and welcome to our first ever episode of Level Table Live. We are here to talk about the human side of legal AI. So submit your questions in the chat, so that way Joey and Daniel can get to them throughout the live stream. So I'm sitting here today with Joey Seeber and our Director of Client Solutions, Daniel Bonner. Fun fact about Joey, he is the former mayor of Tyler, Texas. Those of you in Texas, you get it. Those of you who are not in Texas, well, you might not even have Tyler on your radar. Daniel is who we'd like to call our all-around MacGyver. So Daniel could talk to you all about managed review analytics and even tell you how to make your own barbecue rub. Joey, Daniel, welcome.
Thank you, Chelsea. Daniel, I'm not sure how to take that.
I take it personally.
Well, yeah, Tyler, Texas, that people might not have heard of Tyler, Texas, but that'll be all right. So we are here with the first episode of Level Table Live, as if we're sitting at a table, at a dinner table, having a conversation. We can pretend that we're enjoying good food and drink, Daniel. But the idea is that we're going to have a conversation about whatever comes up. While we have some bullets here, we may or may not use them. But the goal in every Level Table Live is that we'll have fun. Maybe it'll be entertaining, and most of all, informative. Perhaps there'll be some new information that we could share with people, or that we can learn from people's questions. What do you think?
I'm looking forward to it. This is going to be fun. And I can tell you, probably the least qualified person to get into some of these topics, but it's on everyone's mind. We've all got opinions, so we're going to do it.
I've probably never had a bigger case of imposter syndrome than right now, but fortunately we have good help. We've got good people that are going to be asking questions and giving us some information. So people probably don't know about you and I. Chelsea gave a good brief description of each of us. So Daniel, why don't you start?
Yeah, Daniel Bonner, Director of Client Solutions at Level Legal. I was on a client call yesterday. Somebody introduced me as an employee of Level Legal for 15 years. Sounds kind of wild hearing that, but it's the truth. So been here since we opened the doors back in 2009. It was inauguration day, actually. I remember.
That's right.
Driving to the office, and we've had a blast building a business, growing a company, meeting and keeping wonderfully loyal clients, and doing a lot of fun work along the way. So in my former role, I managed projects. I'd interact with our corporate and law firm clients and our internal review teams. More recently, I get to talk about solutions, pricing, setting up matters for success, and really love what I do.
Great.
And I've been blessed to work with you the whole time. So.
Well, likewise. So as Daniel said, at Level Legal, we've been in business for about 15 years, and we started as a pure document review company way back in the day, before that was probably even a thing in 2009. And now, run the whole spectrum of the EDRM. Fortunate to have loyal clients, great employees and partners, and we have a lot of fun, and I get the privilege of serving as CEO. So I practiced law for a few years before other entrepreneurial ventures, and serving as on the city council and as mayor of Tyler, Texas. And now this is what we do full time, and it's a lot of fun. How about we jump in?
Let's do it.
So we had the good fortune, the stars aligned, Daniel, in that we had this live stream planned weeks ago. And just last night at 9:30, there was a huge announcement in the AI world. And have you heard about it?
Yeah, I have.
Okay.
You sent it to me this morning.
Okay, perfect. So let's talk about that, just in case there's anybody that doesn't know. So to tee it up, if you haven't heard, Thomson Reuters has acquired Case Text for $1 bajillion. Maybe not $1 bajillion, but hundreds of millions of dollars. What do you know about Case Text, Daniel?
Well, I actually heard about Case Text's launch of a new tool they have, new application called counsel. They rolled that out, I think in March. Could be, I'll need to double check that, but very recently. And Case Text is an OpenAI based large language model where you can deploy that skill set on a curated set of documents. So you could feed in whatever you want, as opposed to using the crowdsourced information. And obviously, law firms and legal practitioners are feeding it information relevant to the field, and you get all of the horsepower of the generative AI to search, to call, to identify, to connect dots. And so I'm aware of case text through that. They've also got some other automation tools in the industry. I haven't spent a lot of time with it personally, but very, very well aware. It's, I think, a 10-year-old company.
Yeah.
And great reputation.
Yeah. One of the things that I think is interesting about, and I'm glad to know that it's counsel. I thought it was counsel, like that was someone's name. But one of the things I think is a big rap on AI. I think we've heard about the lawyer who got in trouble for making a filing that was generated by AI.
There's been several of them.
One of the problems is the data set that you're drawing from when generative AI is creating. The beautiful thing about co-counsel, and probably why Thomson Reuters is so interested, is Thomson Reuters has the data. They have the documents. And if they then feed them in and co-counsel uses them, then you've got a rich data set from which to draw, rather than just whatever is on the internet.
It's an interesting problem to think about solving. I think some of the acceleration, how quickly the Chat GPT line has improved itself, is because all the information is crowdsourced. But of course, you've got factual information. You've also got all manner of other things that are inaccurate, all of which is being used to train this model. But it has certainly shortened the learning curve, so to speak, so that practitioners can now deploy it with all of those learnings and iterations internally behind a firewall for their unique problems. So it's super interesting.
Way different than just going to ChatGPT and hoping to get a filing. You'll get made up cases and everything else. Before we leave that, just tremendous strategic acquisition by Thomson Reuters. I mean, if I'll date myself, graduated law school in 1990, before there were, computers on everyone's desk. In fact, in the first law firm where I worked in 1990, they were still using Selectric typewriters with a mag card where you could use forms. But I know that was a long time ago now, but it still was 1990. But things have changed quite a bit. And strategically, the acquisition by a kind of an old line company that dealt with, here are the cases and we're going to sell you access to the cases, now feeding that information into the tool, just remarkable.
It's fascinating. Our industry, there's a lot of acquisitions, a lot of consolidation. This one in particular jumped out because the software is transformational. I don't know if it's Gutenberg Bible level, but it's certainly going to change how we practice law, also how we interact with each other and big data sets. So pretty exciting. Yeah.
For those watching, if you haven't checked out, Bob Ambrogi has a good take on this development. I think you could find it by searching Twitter. He had a post late last night, kind of late breaking news. That's where I found it out. So
end of Q2.
End of Q2.
Got to get it done.
Right. That's right. They got it done. Before we take questions, which I think we hope that we have from some of the folks that are joining us, there's been a lot of talk about ChatGPT taking the bar exam. And have you seen the most recent development there?
It passed.
It passed. Not just did it pass, but 4.0 was in the top 10% of the scores in the bar exam.
I remember it being difficult to audit your grade and get them to raise the hood.
That's exactly right. It was, I believe it was less than a year ago when ChatGPT 3.5 took the bar exam.
So kept its scholarship, it's moving quick. It's fascinating to look, and to my point earlier about how rapidly it's accelerating with all of this crowdsourced data, how quickly it went literally from end to end of the bell curve.
Yeah.
And it's kind of scary to think about, if you fast forward 6 months, where it could be.
Yeah.
But that's, was it the multi-state or the unified bar exam?
Well, I think it's the unified bar exam. I don't know. Do you remember taking the bar exam?
Well, very clearly. If you've got time, I got a couple.
You remember any questions on the bar exam?
I do. the written portion included this hypothetical where there's a crop tester spraying pesticides on a state border.
Whiteacre.
Just south was a mixed-use development, and of course, there's a southerly wind, and so there's chemical exposure, and then you have strict liability or all the questions that can come to mind in that scenario. So that was my written portion. There are also some property questions. My favorite, actually, funny bar exam story. I took it in Arlington, Texas. We walked in this massive conference center, room for 200 or 300 people. They had 2 seats per table. I sat down next to an individual who was there. He had his pencils lined up, looked ready to go. They handed the exam out. He flipped through it, got up and walked out.
Okay. Well,
Left the exam. And I thought, I'm in better shape than that person.
yeah.
That was a while ago.
Yeah.
That was a while ago.
I don't remember any questions in bar exam. I remember where I ate lunch after the at lunch on the first day, and I was convinced that by that point I had failed the multi-state, but that didn't happen. All right, so ChatGPT has passed the bar. We've got an acquisition.
Okay. We have another question.
some questions.
From our audience here, how are the courts responding to AI hallucinations?
Are you familiar with the term AI hallucinations, Daniel?
I am. I actually like the term. So it's essentially talking about a confident response that's not supported by the data.
I've given that many times.
In Texas, we have a phrase for that. I was speaking to somebody this weekend where that would apply. We call it hallucination in AI, but essentially, it's sort of a known outcome with some of these large language models. Frustrates engineers. I would think creative types would like it.
Yep.
You can generate some new concepts or ideas. Of note, right? So the question asked about the courts. A couple interesting stories recently. So first, there's an attorney that submitted a brief that was drafted by ChatGPT that cited fake cases.
Yeah, the cases didn't even exist. It wasn't that they didn't apply; they didn't even exist.
They applied very well.
Well, they applied well, but they were fake.
They were fake. I think 9 out of 10 of the citations were fake.
Yeah.
And the attorney submitted the brief and I believe is going through some sanction.
I think we got some sanction action going on. I think I read last week.
I chuckle because it's slightly funny to think about some of the implementations, and there's always people that are going to push the envelope and think about how you could maximize efficiency or recapture some time, even access to justice issues. But you know, I don't believe the attorney expected he would need to verify the results. However, the judge thought otherwise.
The judge or opposing counsel did. Somebody sure did. That's interesting. So that was our first question, Daniel, was how are the courts responding to hallucinations?
Well, and relatedly, this wasn't asked, but in Texas, there's a similar story, probably in response to this New York news story. And the Texas judge is saying you cannot use generative AI to draft your pleadings without certifying that a human has verified the results. So you can use it with a declaration, essentially.
Yeah.
And I think that's reasonable.
Of course, it's reasonable. You think about it, the lawyers, we're very slow to change, and we're very protective of our own.
Mm-hmm.
That's just true. And so I remember, as a matter of fact, I remember when we first started working together, that next year, probably 2010, I went to Legal Tech at the time, before it was Legal Week. And I went to a session about document review. And
here we go.
And
I like this.
There was a technology company that was giving this little seminar about, and the title was Document Review in 2015. And the prediction was there would be no more human review of documents, that version of AI at the time, that tool, would take over, and there would be no more human involvement. I'm sure that the technology was good. I don't think the company exists anymore. But the illustration of the point is that things move in the law much more slowly.
Sure.
Now, having said that, they move very slowly until they don't. And so I think that's one of the things that's got people excited about AI or interested in AI, is that things seem to be moving very rapidly. But to your point, it's going to be the appropriate use, how it's used, and then is the human certifying it. To our title today, the human side of AI. Yeah, we can use AI and we'll learn to use it appropriately. But there are things that humans still are able to do very well that we need to do, and it's still the human that has the bar card.
Mm-hmm. No, that's true. Well, as officers of the court, you swear an oath, you have an allegiance. I think the judge, in fact, said this generative AI owes no allegiance to anyone or any court, right. And so they would have to put that back on the attorneys. It's interesting. I think about just the history of legal research, for instance, right? So volumes of physical books. Then you get into online-based repositories and databases like Westlaw and Lexis when they first started. And of course, firms have their own libraries. And you think about this. The goal of all this is to accelerate your preparation for trial, access to justice, getting your pleadings right. And it's interesting that it did so well. Imagine what it would do with the right data.
Right. Thomson Reuters figured that out. Chelsea, do we have any other questions?
We do have another question from Brandy Smith. Oh, I'm sorry. Nope, Rachel. She said, thanks for hosting. What's the most impressive thing in AI this month?
The most impressive thing in AI this month? Well, to me, the most impressive thing was what we covered, which was passing the bar exam.
Bar exam.
I mean, or not just passing, top 10% of the bar exam. I think that's pretty impressive.
It is. I'm thinking about our original story, talking about case text and Thomson Reuters. I did a little bit of homework this morning, and there's a demo on YouTube you can go watch where the founders feed in real time thousands of pages of information that the system processes and stages to be leveraged as you interact with it through chat. And so, tying these two things together, that the bar exam results are byproduct of the right seed set. Case text is taking it a step further. And to our point earlier about the acceleration, think where we're going to be in 2024.
Yeah.
It's a little bit frightening.
Is it frightening or exciting?
A lot of horsepower.
Yeah.
I've got ChatGPT up right now also in case we get stumped.
This is awesome.
We can do an audible.
Do you have co-counsel or co-counsel?
Not up.
Okay.
Fun fact though, so I just asked, did you pass the bar exam? And this is actually noteworthy. So as of my knowledge cutoff in September 2021, ...
Okay.
It's important to think about. We talk about the seed sets. What data is this engine using to generate what we need? Can you think of a recent 2-year time period where things have changed more?
No, but I think that could probably be said in each 2-year period.
Right. I mean, imagine if this was 2019 versus 2020. Yeah. It's a whole different world. But it's a good reminder, right? And so, I think about also law firms implementing this internally behind the firewall. And I read it may take $500,000 to $1 million just to even spin something up.
Yeah.
But think about the treasure trove, some of the best legal minds at these wonderful firms we work with. Think about all the briefs and the memos, their entire database and work product.
Yeah.
And what you could do with that. I mean, you could say, find me every case we won related to this issue.
Right.
Or in this time frame. It's really neat.
Well, and presumably all of the briefs, motions, filings of the lawyers in that firm for many years can be also fed so that it could be, you can capture that knowledge, and the information, and then, move from there. I heard recently about a creative AI. I think it was Notion. I think Notion is the name of the tool that creatives are using to feed all of your columns, all of your blogs, all of your writings into it. And then with the seed set of your own writing, asking the tool to then write a 500-word blog on X. And the reports I heard were it can be pretty good, at least as a first draft.
On the way up here today, I was listening to a podcast. Lex Friedman, I don't know if you listen to him.
Yeah.
Super interesting. He also has a lot of guests on to talk about AI. He works in the space and specifically automation, a lot of self-driving cars, but knows a lot of the industry contacts and it's fascinating stuff. But one of the guests was talking about, and he had written a book, was talking about testing ChatGPT with something similar. And he has a very particular writing style. And one of his books included a list, top 7 things related to ABC, and said, write the next chapter in this style and give me the next list. And he said it was almost imperceptible.
Wow.
A to B.
Wow. All right. Now I'm scared. Chelsea, how about another question?
Yes. So a reminder for everybody watching live, please type your questions in the chat and Joey and Daniel will get to them. So next question from David. Would it be better to consider using AI as augmented rather than artificial? Use it to assist the humans rather than replace. Augmented intelligence could fit for both sides of the argument.
I could not have said that better. I think that's what we're talking about. We just didn't use David's artful words. This is augmented intelligence. It is not artificial. We're taking what is already known and creating a first draft, creating a first draft of a brief or some other writing, getting that information that would otherwise take hours and hours of research and creativity, and then presenting it to the human. To me, that is the perfect illustration of the human side of AI. You're using augmented intelligence then to help as a first step.
But it's about use case, right? So a human using it, augmentation for sure. But the artificial piece can come in when we start talking about creative AI and the generative AI.
Yeah.
So you feed it enough, prompt it to go do something on its own. And I think there's an important distinction there.
Yeah.
But actually, interesting, we're talking about use cases. You probably saw the EU.
Oh, man. That was just last week.
Regulation proposal finalized this June. And it may be, I think it's the negotiation piece, what they want to look to pass. It kind of feels like GDPR almost, with very severe penalties, but they're looking at use case and risk and not so much the tool set, but how you use it, how you deploy it.
Yeah.
Pretty interesting. They're leading the way, Europe, of course, on the regulations.
Yes, of course. That's the topic of a whole nother one of our sessions here, and that is regulation in the EU versus the US and how we do it. But when I heard that, I thought, it will be really interesting 1-2 years hence to see what has happened, whether this is working. It's the proverbial genie out of the bottle. So can you really regulate AI like that in the kind of information world that we live in? I don't know how that works.
I don't think you can regulate AI. I think you regulate the use of AI.
Yeah.
And based on the outcomes. And I'm looking at it here, actually, just pulled it up. Proposed penalty up to 40 million or 7% of revenue.
Wow.
Whichever is higher.
Of course. Well, look, plenty of work for us, Daniel. Somebody's going to get in trouble.
Absolutely.
All right.
No, they already have. But you heard that OpenAI is getting sued for libel, right? They're suing the artificial intelligence.
Yeah. Good luck there. All right, Chelsea, any other questions?
Yes, we do. From Vincent. Will AI replace attorneys or any aspect of their day-to-day tasks? And number 2, what can attorneys do now to prepare for AI?
I heard a great quote on this topic, our friend Ari Kaplan.
Ari.
He said, I'm not sure AI will replace lawyers, but lawyers that use AI will definitely replace lawyers that don't.
Well said.
It's a tool, right?
It's a tool.
I'm not scared of it. We at one of our level table dinners I remember discussion about attorneys seeking to work at the top of their license, and really any professional who want to do the edge case work that pushes boundaries and that really calls up all of their skills, creativity, and diligence. Same's true for attorneys, right? There's a lot of rote, repetitive, brute force tasks that are required. Think about legal research. Sometimes document review exercises can have a massive scope. And so I view this as a tool so that bright attorneys that use it well and know when to deploy it can get back working at the top of their license, the creative things, the legal arguments, access to justice, thinking about improving the field all around in our lives, which is the whole point of being in law anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think the critical thinking skills are still at a premium, even more of a premium, right? So critical thinking skills are negatively correlated to AI. It is going to take that final review, the
human touch,
those things that we see in context and concepts that may not be represented in the words. To me, there will always be a place for humans, for lawyers who are trained and understand and have the human experience. The extent to which it's augmented, or I think it's going to be the real question. It will be fascinating to see.
Vincent's second question is a good one too, which relates to what attorneys can do given this reality. And I would say that the best thing to do is to start interacting with these systems and learn how they work. So the ChatGPT, I know you know this, you get on there and you prompt it, and then there's output. You can course correct, or you can augment, or you can say more in this tone, or slightly less formal, something funnier. It's a chat bot, and it's generating content based on what you tell it. But that's an art.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Because two people could ask a question in the same sphere and get totally different responses based on how you put your finger on the scale.
I saw a headline yesterday. Maybe it was clickbait. I didn't take the bait, but it said that those who understand those nuances and how to use those people are at an absolute premium in it through the figure of $800,000 a year pay. Now, I don't know what that person's doing, but certainly at a premium to be able to use and then you kind of know how to make adjustments.
Absolutely.
With the tool.
Well, and really to tie it back to some of the news stories we've talked about, the proper implementation is a big force multiplier. But if you use it incorrectly, right, you could get sanctioned or sued, somebody get injured, lose their freedoms, things like that. And so diligent, appropriate, aggressive use is going to be at a premium.
Right.
And so, and it's not an easy button either, right? You can't just tell it to give you a successful career. You still have to understand client relationships and hard work and being creative, thinking about legal arguments and pursuing justice.
This reminds me of kind of a notion of the value of the human. So one of the things that we like to say when we talk about what value we bring as a company to engagements is the better technology gets, the more the tools are used, then even more, so the less humans are involved. When humans are involved, it's even more important.
Absolutely.
It's even at more of a premium. So that we are using the technology tools. We're obviously using many more of them all the time, every year. Rapid acceleration of the tools. But then when it calls for human involvement in any engagement, in any interaction, it's a human dealing with a human. So we may be a human at our company and we're dealing with a human at another company or in a law firm. Those are the people that are still engaging with me. I don't engage with bots who are clients, at least not yet.
Not yet.
So that's where the human side, even if it's in the communication, the understanding, that's where the human side is really important.
I mean, a parallel I read that's related, think about the individuals, the professionals, the engineers, the artists that need to create and collaborate to train factory automated robots to do welding or to do some task. You're programming it. You've got the physical and the physics of the machines themselves, right? Those interactions are critical. If that's wrong,
right,
you push play.
That's right.
you're starting over. So it's a good point. And it also reminds me of, some of the predictive coding workflows we work on. One of the cautionary tales is who you have reviewing the seed set of documents to train the model really matters.
Right. Yeah.
And even if you have two very intelligent attorneys that have differences of opinion, the model may diverge at a point you don't want. So to your point, right, the human interaction becomes more critical the more automation we deploy.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's going to change.
Yeah. Agree. Chelsea, any other questions?
Yes, we have another question from Brandy. How does AI handle managed review?
That's a great question. So case text, for instance, is a good example. It has the ability to ingest large amounts of data. We're talking hundreds of thousands of pages, probably more than that. And then you can go and prompt it to identify patterns, to call up information that's relevant to a specific topic that may be germane to the case, find things that are candidates to exclude. And it's essentially a search interface in that context. Now, you still have to understand the rules of discovery, your obligations on what to produce, confidentiality and privilege law, and orient the machine around your strategic goals. But I look at it as a high horsepower user interface, much like we use in our practice, to find documents of interest, to find documents to exclude defensively. And it will accelerate the practice of law in the discovery context. Now, the big question to me is whether corporate and law firm counsel views that as risk in terms of relying solely on an AI-based production. Where do you draw the line in terms of QC, what the ROI is, what the right case to test it is? And in my job, I do this every day, right? We always bring up automation and the value of AI well deployed. The consistent answer often is, let's try that on the next one.
Yeah.
I got this thing right now, though.
You're right.
Please move forward.
I need to make sure it gets done and gets done right.
Absolutely.
So
there's risk.
To your point, how does counsel view it? How does the client view it? And then most importantly, how does the bench, the judges, judiciary, how do they view it? And my guess is that we'll see a wide divergence there. You have pioneers that are eager to adopt it, and then you have those that are slower. So who knows?
Imagine a document review hallucination.
I won't say I've seen them, but early on we might have
all manner of problems could start. It's a good point, though, right? So to tie the last question together, the responsiveness analysis is somewhat more predictable than identifying PII or attorney-client privilege information, or that this topic is the keys to our company's future in terms of sensitive IP. And so each data set would be different. I can tell you this, though, there are plenty of matters where aggressive use and even taking on a little bit of risk makes sense, just with the risk profile for the matter, the amount of controversy. And I actually think maybe some of the earliest use cases might be access to justice type matters where there may not be budget for all the discovery required. Why not?
Yeah. I think you're right. One of the points you raised there is attorney-client privilege. And I think as we've seen in our work, it's different in different jurisdictions. It's different based upon context, particularly when you're looking at communications and emails. If there's an attorney involved, what is the role of the attorney? How do you know those things? And so there are many of those things that are not evident from the four corners of the documents, if you will, or just the letters that are contained in the documents. And so it's things like that as a great example that would still be challenging just to determine from the documents themselves. So
that's a good point.
We'll see.
I like that. That's a good question.
Chelsea, anything else?
Next question. Yes. From David again. Does the introduction of law firms owned by non-lawyers cause some concerns about using GPT and other artificial intelligence strictly for profits as opposed to following profession standards in client representations? How are ethics impacted by this, knowing that non-lawyer business owners of law firms may not be subject to the same ethical standards as lawyers are?
It's such a good question.
Great
You're
question.
going to answer it.
So, first of all, in the U.S., I'm sure our viewers know this, but in the U.S., non-lawyer ownership of law firms is still in its infancy.
Sure.
I believe Utah has a sandbox. Arizona has something similar. I think those are the only two I know of. There may be others. It's experimental. There's a sandbox where you have to be approved by the state, certain standards. There's still an aversion in the United States to non-lawyer ownership of law firms. Now,
who do you think is averse to that?
Well, we protect ourselves, Daniel. So, however, in the UK and I believe other places, not a problem. So I do think that there are ethical considerations. All joking aside, there are certainly ethical considerations about decisions that are made. Are they made in the best interest of the client, or are they kind of bottom line oriented in the firm? My own opinion is that is largely a distinction without a difference.
Yeah, I agree.
And we're a self-protective guild as lawyers. But I do think whether it's the application of AI, how it is used, or any other myriad of topics, it's an important conversation to have.
It's interesting. Yeah, I think this is a situation, two things can be true at once, right? Arguably, a lot of law firms, businesses like ours, would benefit from strategic, sound business advice from non-lawyers. And we come to rely on experts in all types of fields like that. But also, it's no secret, law firms are profit-centered. It's not a charity, right? And so those two things will merge. I think one benefit of non-lawyer ownership of firms potentially just would be the acceleration of technology adoption and innovation. Lawyers exist to mitigate risk, right? Firm leadership exists to keep the firm moving forward, and risk is viewed as a problem. And so that obviously gets waterfalled down throughout the organization, as you'd expect. And so that could certainly accelerate some of the things we're talking about. And I also rely on our ethical obligations. Doesn't matter who owns the company. If you're practicing law, you have
That's right.
duty, and doesn't matter who you answer to. I think it's the same way inside corporations. Those are non-lawyer owned businesses. We're in-house, so serving the client, and it's no different.
Well, I think the medical profession is similar, right? So there are lots of doctors who don't work for just themselves. They work for corporations or practices. They have no ownership, but their same ethical obligations exist, and they're still bound by those and are accountable for those at the various state authorities. So those things can exist. Chelsea.
That's a long question. I liked it though.
Yes, we have our next question here from Albert. It has been suggested that new AI tools should go through an approval process. Think FDA approval for drugs, for instance. What are your thoughts?
This
sounds very European.
This is interesting, right? So if we want generative AI, then you have to pick a set of values to train around. But then you get into the question, well, whose values? And the way I see this ultimately landing is the values will align with that particular AI's investor. I think it would prove challenging to have a global, standard, centralized AI like that. And so it's almost like Wikipedia, right? The fact that works at all is surprising.
Right.
It's crowdsourced, and most of the time it does a pretty good job. But if the article's about you and it's wrong,
it's a terrible job.
It's awful. And so I would ask a question back to Albert. who gets to make those decisions, what approval process, and what are the criteria? Does it need to work perfectly, like in medicine,
Right.
or can it be close enough to help some college student with some research? And these are the ethics of this are super interesting. I think that's a whole nother conversation probably, but
Yeah.
it's a great question.
The ethics of AI. I wonder if we could find, maybe we could find an expert for that in a future session.
Absolutely.
Interesting. A great question, Albert. Chelsea.
Next question.
Yeah.
From Brandy Smith, what's the downside of using these tools / data in legal practice? What is the case against it?
The case against using AI tools.
Well, to our discussion earlier about some of the misuses,
Yeah.
I think it's the improper application or not understanding the way it works. And actually, to the attorney Schultz in New York, he said in open court, I didn't know this could create false cases. That hadn't occurred to him.
Yeah.
And so understanding the tools, and this goes for everything, understanding the tools, how they need to be deployed, what pivot points may occur depending on how you use them, and how to QC and validate that in your diligence process is critical. I see the downside as poorly timed use or misuse.
Mm.
But if you understand how it can be used and how it can benefit you, I see a lot of positive.
Yeah. I agree. Good answer. I'm not even going to try to change that.
Awesome.
How about one last question, Chelsea? If we have one.
We do. Let's see. What's coming up next? Will AI replace? Nope. Not that question. For Brandy Smith, how does AI handle manage review?
I think we did that one.
Yeah,
Did that
Brandy, we did that one. I think Brandy must have stepped away.
she didn't hear us.
She missed the first one and she came back with another one. So that's all right. Any others, Chelsea?
Yes. So here at Level Legal, we like to make legal human. So Joey, what is your story on making legal human?
Yeah. So we do talk about making legal human, as you know, Daniel. I'm telling you as if you don't know, but you do. We'd like to talk about making legal human, and that is that as we have become more data oriented, as the tools, as we've talked about, so many technology tools out there, even communication tools out there. We communicate a lot by email, in written format with each other instead of picking up the phone or face to face like we used to. And so again, as all those tools are available and we use them, it's even more important that we are communicating as humans. My favorite story about the human and human interaction in legal is from one of our level table actual dinners.
Okay.
Not a level table live. It was actually the first one that we did, which was before we called it level table. And the concept there was to gather colleagues together to have a meal and enjoy that conversation with each other. And it was a low-key kind of approach to just getting a community of people together. Most of the people that we gathered didn't know each other. They were legal professionals in the San Francisco area. There were about 12 or 15 of us at the table. And it was a beautiful, what happened there was a beautiful thing. And that is, we talked about topics of interest for the day, topics of interest in their particular areas. They got to know each other over a meal. And then after it was over, most of the people there stayed around for another hour.
Oh, wow.
Getting to know each other. And then there were some friendships that developed in that even move on to today with people that didn't know each other.
That's a neat story.
Why is that? That's not just a legal story.
No.
It's a human story, but it's the human side of legal. It's nurturing that human side of legal in the face of all of the other distractions and tools that we have. People helping each other. And at the end of the day, I think that's what we're about at Level Legal, and that's what lawyers in their original calling were called to do, and that is to help each other. So that's my favorite story about making legal human. So,
That's awesome.
I think we're going to do this again, Daniel.
Let's do it. I have a good quote to close with.
Okay.
Also, when it's time.
All right. I think it's time.
Our friend Dan from Louisiana
Yeah.
shared this at a master's conference in Washington, D.C. So full attribution here. I believe, though, the quote is from an author. But
All right.
he was talking about some transformational topics like we are today. And he said, the future's here. It's just not evenly distributed yet.
I think that's good.
I think that's William Robbins, the science fiction author.
Okay.
But I'm quoting Dan.
Yeah. Well,
This is fun.
perfect way to end. Chelsea, let's tell folks about our next session.
Thank you guys for tuning in to our first ever episode, Level Table Live. If we didn't get to your questions in time, please type them in the chat and we will follow up with you after the live stream. Keep an eye out for our next live stream on July 26th at noon to 1 p.m. Central Time. And it's going to cover the topic of forget AI. Check out these potential review analytics tools that you're not using. I'm sorry, powerful tools that you're not using.